I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Hi, Kiki.
Hi, Tuesday.
And here we are, the grand finale of Disaster Month.
I'm over it.
So, how are we going to end Disaster Month? We've had the tsunami, we've had the burning building, we've had asteroids from space, and we probably have the most realistic and greatest villain to the planet, climate change.
I mean, you say realistic. I mean, climate change is realistic. This movie is not. Let's get that. Climate change, real. What happens in this movie, not real. Let's put that out there.
We are talking about The Day After Tomorrow, the 2004 film by Roland Emmerich, the guy that directed the crappy Godzilla movie.
Ah, Roland. We meet at last. For the first time, but probably not for the last time.
And Roland Emmerich is not above putting his own personal views in his movies. After all, he made the mayor in the Godzilla movie, Roger Ebert, because Roger Ebert doesn't like his movies.
I mean, does anybody really like a Roland Emmerich movie? Says the woman with a Stargate tattoo on her leg.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just putting that out there. You know, I don't have a Stargate tattoo because I like Roland Emmerich. I have a Stargate tattoo because I'm a linguist and James Spader is hot. But yeah, Roland. Roland Emmerich is. How to describe Roland Emmerich? Roland Emmerich is a man who has never met a conspiracy theory he did not like. Pretty much every one of his films, including the historical films he's done, because he's done a few, have some kind of weird slant to them that goes into the conspiratorial or slightly odd. I mean, like I said, I love Stargate, but it's all like, you know, what if pyramids were built by aliens? Even Godzilla there's, you know, the weird little bits in there where, you know, you have the strange scientists and the bad science and everything, which is weird for a film series that already starts out with kind of the dubious science of what if radiation could make giant lizards, you know?
I mean, not long after this, he does the movie 2012, which already went into which goes into another conspiracy theory about that being the end of the world.
And then he did what is probably the most personally offensive movie to me as a human being, which was his movie Anonymous, about the authorship question of Shakespeare. He sides with he's what they call an anti-Stratfordian, which is that Shakespeare could not have possibly written the plays of Shakespeare, which, if you believe that, stop listening to my podcast. I hate you, and I never ever want to speak to you. Yeah. In which you discover that Roland Emmerich thinks that the Tudor rose, which was a heraldic symbol that combined the white rose and the red rose, which were on opposite sides of the English Civil War. One side used a red heraldic rose, one side used a white heraldic rose. He apparently thinks that the Tudor rose is a thing you can grow in the actual ground. I cannot explain to you. Like, this is like thinking that, like, the Welsh dragon from their flag is a real creature, or like a unicorn, or a, you know, that kind of thing. It's like coming across somebody who's like, no, I really do think mermaids are real. You know, it's like,
I saw one.
okay, precious. All right, you know, go plant me one in your garden and bring it to me, and then I will. All right. But, you know, he doesn't understand botany either, as well as any other form of science. All right, you go, Roland. So anyway, as a person with an English degree who likes heraldry and medieval studies and Shakespeare, that movie offended me on like several different levels. I was constantly surprised by it. Anyway. Roland Emmerich decides he's going to take on climate change in this one.
Back when it was called global warming.
Yeah, and of course, that leads to the thing in the movie of like, how can global warming cause a ice age? You know, which is kind of why we've moved to calling it climate change now, because that's what people kept saying. They didn't understand that things like, you know, massive snowstorms and stuff like that could be part of the general warming trend of the climate. This film is correct in the fact of, yes, climate change is a problem. Yes, we should do something about it. Yes, extreme weather events are a growing problem, even as we sit here recording this. However, as many climate scientists and atmospheric scientists and regular scientists and people who have been through high school science have pointed out, this isn't the way things work, but it does make for fun images on a screen. You know?
I mean, of all of the disaster movies we've talked about, like I said, this is something that could happen. Could it happen within our lifetime?
It is happening within our lifetime. Where I live, which is right in the middle of Hurricane Central, my first job out of high school was working in a warehouse that stored tobacco and managed the auctions of tobacco for cigarette companies and cigar companies and things like that. I live in a very highly agricultural area. Agriculture is most of what we do. We grow a variety of crops, one of which is tobacco. You need somewhere to cure it, to store it, to auction it. I worked in there as data entry. Okay. I worked there during a year that was considered one of the worst years due to hurricanes that they had seen in anybody's recorded lifetime. It absolutely wrecked tobacco production throughout the area. Just recently, within the last year or so, I began to wonder how that year stacked up with the hurricanes we've been seeing lately, because I don't know if people who live outside of hurricane affected areas understand this, but in the part of the US where hurricanes really are an issue, we have begun to understand how bad this has gotten, in the fact of When I was a kid, you would maybe in a bad year make it up to the letter H in the hurricane name registry. Now we are getting to the point where we have gotten through all of the letters in the name registry and into the backup name registry. And that is typical now in a year. So many hurricanes are forming. We are also seeing year after year higher category hurricanes every year. We would see like a lot of tropical storms. Maybe they would turn into category 1 or category 2. Now it is very common to see more and more category 3, category 4, even category 5 hurricanes. When I was a kid, a category 5 hurricane was extremely rare. You would see them, once every several years. And they might form out in the Atlantic and never even hit land. To actually have them hit land was extremely rare and massively devastating. And now they are happening with higher frequency, that you will get something hit land that is category 3 or above. Every year that I looked up since that horribly devastating year that I worked in the tobacco warehouse, every single hurricane season, every single year, and that was roughly 20 years ago, has been worse than that highly devastating season I worked in the tobacco warehouse. Every year has been worse. And now that's become the normal. That's just hurricanes in my area. The day before we're recording this, a major news outlet just ran a story about farmers in my area and how they are able to grow crops that would have, 10 years ago been only able to be grown several hundred miles south of where I am. And because of warming trends, they are now able to grow them in my region. One of our staple crops may not be able to be grown in this region because it no longer gets cold enough to provide the characteristic yearly cold snap that the crop needs to propagate itself for the next season anymore. Everything is moving kind of northward as far as crop production because everything is getting too warm to be grown. It's happening. It's just not happening on a Roland Emmerich big budget scale.
Because the way it's happening in real life doesn't make it for a good movie. You gotta expand. You gotta turn it up to 1 million, and then we have the entire world freezing at once.
Yeah, it's not as, having a farmer sit there and tell you, hey, I wasn't able to grow this kind of, a fruit or vegetable here because the climate was too cold and now I can grow it here, isn't really as compelling as showing a shot of, the Statue of Liberty covered in ice and being like, behold, climate change. But that's what it is, But honestly, look at the devastation in Florida just in the last few months as of time of recording, and time that you will be hearing this. We've just had 2 hurricanes in the last 2 to 3 months that have leveled parts of Florida, as in taken out 90% of actual towns in Florida. They're not there anymore. You can look at satellite photos from the day before and the day after, and 90% of the structures are not standing in that town anymore. And it doesn't even make the news because it's just another hurricane. And 2 weeks later, another one hit just north of that area. you can say what you want about the science in this being completely incorrect as far as how it happens, and I will stand up for that. Yes, the science in this is not how it happens, but the point behind it of, hi, you haven't listened to the climate science, and now we are having catastrophic weather disasters that are ruining the ability to live in certain places, is actually factual. We are having horrifically devastating floods. We are having horrifically devastating hurricanes. We are having larger than usual tornadoes.
I mean, jump on the other coast. The number of wildfires in California has exceptionally jumped up, and California is under a permanent drought these days.
Yeah, and even going outside of the U.S., we have been having massive flooding throughout the Middle East and India and in parts of Africa I mean, it's been just absolutely devastating. The horrible heat wave that hit earlier this year throughout the UK and parts of Europe, unthinkable a few years ago. These things are happening, and they are happening with greater frequency, and if you listen to the climate scientists, they will continue to pick up speed. But it's not happening with a big budget special effects extravaganza.
And that was one of the big criticisms of the movie, is that because this was a big budget blockbuster special effects spectacle, that people may not take climate change seriously because they see it as a fantastical idea in a movie. And we're kind of stuck in that in real life. I mean, the more as this stuff becomes more and more regular, we're still having the same arguments in 2022, almost 2023, that they're having in this movie in 2004. So it's shown that the powers that be haven't learned a damn thing. Yeah, we're getting preachy with this on the podcast. Sorry.
I'm not sorry. Say what you want about Roland Emmerich, and I will, but this is the one thing that I really will align with him on, is the fact that there are some things said in this movie that are correct and serious issues. I will take him to task, though, for where he got the idea for this movie, which is its own kettle of fish. Because, like I said, Roland Emmerich is a man who never met a conspiracy theory he didn't like. And this comes directly from a conspiracy theorist, specifically a book written by a talk radio host who at the time had a sort of late night AM radio rant show, call-in show called Coast to Coast AM, where he would just talk about conspiracy theories and other paranormal things. Guy named Art Bell. He has passed since. He wrote a book with a guy named Whitley Schreiber called The Coming Global Superstorm. It was their idea that climate change, what they said, global warming would shut down the Gulf Stream and the North Atlantic Drift, and that would warm the ice caps at the North Pole, and that would destabilize the salinity of the ocean, and that would cause all kinds of massive storms. Basically, the entire plot of this movie. The thing is that Roland Emmerich apparently read this book and thought, hey, that'd make for a good movie. And Roland Emmerich pitched this movie in a rather unique way, which is kind of commonplace for him now, to my understanding, which is that he wrote up a treatment and he sent it to basically every major studio and said, this is what I'm going to do in my next movie. Do you want to produce it? You have 24 hours to respond. Apparently, Fox was the only one that responded. But apparently that's just how he does his movies now, because he's got his own little production company, and then he is like, I'm going to do this movie, and it's going to be under my production company, and then I need you to handle the financing and the distribution and all that kind of stuff. And then he just basically sends out the script to everybody and goes like, okay, who wants this one? And that's how he does things, apparently. But this one ended up at Fox, which is how it's ended up on our show.
Like every one of these disaster movies we've done so far, this has a... I wouldn't exactly call this an all-star cast.
But it's a lot of star cast.
Yeah, Dennis Quaid is our main lead. He's Dennis Quaid. I have to tell you who Dennis Quaid is. I'm sorry. Jake Gyllenhaal? He wasn't exactly Jake Gyllenhaal then.
Well, I mean, he'd already done a bunch of stuff. I mean, he'd already done Donnie Darko, and he'd already done October Sky, and both of those had been fairly big hits. I mean, not like huge hits, but especially Donnie Darko had already been kind of a cult hit. Right after this, he'd go into Brokeback Mountain. The mom is played by Celia Ward.
I know her more as a television actor, mostly from CSI.
Yeah, I mean, I knew her more as a television actor as well. I kind of remembered her from just her being, bouncing around various shows. I never really watched CSI, but she was in House, and of course Frasier and stuff, and she was always in things. But of course, I think the biggest thing I remember her in, as far as like the big touchstone thing for me, was she was the wife in The Fugitive that Harrison Ford gets accused of killing.
She would work with Roland Emmerich again, playing the president in the Independence Day sequel.
Yeah.
Emmy Rossum, people might know her from the TV show Shameless. I will always know her as playing Bulma in the worst Dragon Ball movie ever made, which is owned by Fox, which means this is owned by Disney.
Yeah. The thing is, though, is that she had not really had her big breakthrough for me until after this. Like, I didn't personally remember her until after this. A lot of people will be like, well, she was in Mystic River, but I never saw that. So, I kind of remember her being in that Phantom of the Opera movie.
Oh, yeah.
Which I didn't like, because I don't like Andrew Lloyd Webber. Come at me. I don't care. I'll fight you on that. But, interestingly, though, she was in one of the remakes of Poseidon Adventure. And then kind of one of our other big names in this, we got Ian Holm. We've talked about Ian Holm before, because, he was in Alien, everything. It's kind of funny, we just got done talking about young Bilbo, because we just talked about Martin in our little
Black Panther.
Black Panther. And
if you have not listened to it yet, go back into it. Since it did come out like late in the week.
Yeah, we mentioned Martin in that, and then we got the older Bilbo.
The older Bilbo
in this one. So, but we properly talked about about good old Sir Ian back when we did Alien. So anyway, he's here again. And this is a huge cast, and it's got a lot of people in it. We will not go into all of them directly, but yeah, that's our main cast right there.
So yeah, as you said, the point of the movie, the plot of the movie is that polarized caps are melting, putting a lot of, as they say, fresh water into the seawater, and it's causing massive change in the currents of the water, massive storms, new ice age. That's the point here. Everything else, spectacle, because like right off the bat, we get hailstorms in Japan, tornadoes in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it starts off smaller, as these things do. We got that with Armageddon as well, with the small little meteorites coming down, and all relatively small compared to the big ones, coming down and destroying smaller chunks of the globe. And that's what we get here. We get the hailstorms that are, oh well, that's bigger hail than normal, and all that kind of stuff. And
I don't know if it was intended to be funny or not, because the hail starts falling, and then there's this one cop that sees it and obviously is mentioning how big it is, until another one falls and cracks his head open.
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of Roland's humor. I mean, you've seen the other films he's done, at least some of them, and yeah, that was definitely intended as a form of dark humor. We start getting the various bits of both the early storms and also the bits of character development. But the first big one, of course, is when we see the ice shelf break away and we get our introduction to Dennis Quaid's character, Jack, when they're drilling for the ice core samples, and the ice shelf just suddenly breaks off, and he has to make that daring leap to save the science. Oh my god, we must save the science, not the science!
And even his cohort is saying, that was stupid. Why did you do that?
Because it's science and we must save it. The funniest thing, though, is that, he makes the first jump and he barely makes it because the thing is too big, and they're like, no, you'll never make the jump back. And of course, he's carrying these giant, heavy bits of ice, and it's a huge chasm now, and he makes it, or almost makes it, and he makes it easily, and then the ice breaks underneath him and he starts to fall, and then just suddenly he magics an ice pick out of nowhere, because that is not in his hand when he falls.
Plot armor.
Yeah, he just suddenly magics that out of absolute nowhere. But, he saves the day, and he saves the science, and they're able to go back. And then, of course, you find out that, his wife's a doctor, and his son's really smart, and headed to New York for, a science bowl, and...
Yeah. Academic decathlons and all that. Yeah. And there's a nice scene where, our super genius son flunked. How did our super genius son flunk? And then he says, well, I told off the teacher because I could do the work in my head and he can't. So your teacher flunked you because you were smarter than him? Yep. And I'll talk to him about that. It's a nice moment, and kind of shows that it doesn't really go anywhere past the fact that we see the academic decathlon for like 5 seconds, but the whole super genius son doesn't really play into the plot at all.
The thing is, though, is that none of that really makes sense, because one, anybody who's ever taken a math class knows that you have to show your work. I am the worst at math, and even I know that. Also, his father is an internationally renowned scientist. He would not be like, oh yeah, no, it's cool that you can just do the work in your head. Like, no, as a scientist, you know that you've got to show your work. Because even if you can do the work in your head, it needs to be there for peer review. No scientist worth their salt would be like, yeah, no, you need to have that down on paper so other people can look at, it's like, it doesn't matter if you can do it in your head. It's cool that you can do it in your head. The point is having it down on paper so that other people can go back and check your work and also be able to follow your work, learn from your work, replicate your work. That's the point of math and science. Not to be able to prove that you're hot stuff and can do it in your head. That's fine, but that's not the point here. It's just the fact that his dad's like, I'll talk to your teacher about it. The only thing that you would have talked to the teacher about was, I have explained to my son the proper, way of doing math. Could you please allow him to go back and take the test again and do it properly this time so we can teach him the real lesson? I could see that happening.
But what we get is the proud papa moment of student tells up teacher, and then you get, you get Dennis Quaid smiling and saying, oh yeah, that's my boy. Tell up the teacher. I used to do that.
Which, and I'm going to say this, does prove Roland Emmerich's kind of anti-intellectual streak, which does show through in a lot of his movies, because he wants to be in the, like, you have to listen to the scientist, why aren't you listening to the smart person thing, which a lot of these movies have. We talked about it with the Michael Bay thing, too, of like, are you going to listen to the smart person or are you not? And it comes up in this movie, too, where it's like, well, this movie has a lot of, you should have listened to the scientist. Why didn't you listen to the scientist? Except that all of these conspiracy theory movies are based on things that only come about because people don't actually listen to the scientists.
Or don't understand the science.
Or don't understand the scientists, because it's like, immediately they're like, well, what if the ice shelf cracked off into the ocean and made there less salt? And then the scientist goes, well, we've already modeled that and we know exactly what would happen in that scenario, and it wouldn't be as extreme as you think. And then, the conspiracy theorists go, yeah, but what if it did anyway? Because I think it would. And then it's like, well, but you didn't listen to the scientist. The scientist has gone through this. They have models. They can tell you, they can talk you through it. Maybe you don't understand it, but they've been to school for this. They've run calculations on it. They've run it through computer modeling. We kind of know how likely this is and what
But that's boring. I want exciting.
Yeah, and then it's like, but what if happened anyway? Like, okay, it's cool to think about the, like, but maybe what if? But the problem is, like, yeah, but the models are kind of doing the thing so far that the scientists have told us they would. They've kind of proven right so far, so maybe we should just listen to the scientist instead of the conspiracy theorist. Roland? How about that, Roland? You want to do that? No? You want to make the movie instead with the crazy Ice Age thing? Okay, all right, we'll do that. Do that instead. All right. So yeah, so the fact that that his, like, scientist guy would do that is kind of the like, yeah, you show him you're a smarty. You do it all in your head. You don't have to prove your work. You know better. Is kind of the weird anti-intellectual conspiracy theorist bit, showing, like you said, Roland puts his ideas on the screen. So
it feels like he wanted to do a disaster movie with the heart being this father-son story, and just needed a disaster, and then just happened to come across that book.
All of his films are like that. I mean, it's like that in Independence Day. It's like that in most of his other films, where he's got this idea of you won't, and he's not wrong, because all disaster movies do this. We talked about this in Towering Inferno. We talked about this in Poseidon Adventure, of the, zeroing in on the characters you care about. So I'm not saying this is a Roland Emmerich problem, but the idea of the disaster movie is you're not really going to care about all the people that are in danger if you don't have a focus character of like, oh no, but I hope that person isn't in danger. Okay, but what about the, millions of other people that are in danger? Okay, but as long as Liv Tyler is okay, that's all we care about. Okay, but you don't care about the Earth maybe blowing up? That's where you keep your stuff. Like, no, Liv Tyler has to be okay. It's like,
we need to care about the person being played by the highest famed celebrity.
Yeah, it's like that's the issue. You have to have one person you care about to save the world for, So that's why they're doing that.
There's one moment here that is too real, but also feels like a commentary. Is the tornadoes are happening in LA, and there's a bunch of people with camcorders recording it. Like, if this was made just a few years later, everyone would be having their iPhones out, filming it, putting it on social media, and they would in real life.
And you know what? I hate when they do that commentary.
Like, what are you doing here? Get out of here. The storm's coming. But there are people who would do that. Am I wrong?
And you know what I'm going to say, though, is, but why do we consider that such a horrific thing? Yes, sometimes for the average person, okay? Like I said, I live in Hurricane Central. What happens when a hurricane's coming? All the people drive, one way because they're evacuating. But who's going the other way? All the Weather Channel people. And they're always standing there waist deep in water being like, well, the wind's really high right now, Chet. I don't know about you, but and there just goes a tree limb, And you're always kind of thinking like, I mean, do we really need to see it? But in some ways, yeah, we kind of do really need to see it. Think about all of the things that we have thanks to this technology where we're like, we know what was going on at that time. And usually, I'm not saying all the time, but usually people will only film, most people will only film a relatively safe enough distance for them, People overestimate, like, how many people would like stay and keep filming and, all that kind of stuff. Because we have real life instances to take from. Have people died doing that? Yes, it does happen. It does, but it is a smaller statistic than people think. And people like to make fun of it because like, oh, look at that person and how ridiculous they were, A lot of people, once they get to a bit of a safer distance, will turn around and document for others to know what happened. But the fact that these movies keep showing like, and here are all these idiot people standing there 2 feet away from a tornado, No, I mean, probably not what would happen in that scenario. How do we know that? Because we have places where tornadoes happen with relative frequency, and people do not tend to stay in that situation and do that. They tend to get to a safer distance and then turn their camera on it. So I think that this is another bit when it shows up in movies like this. It to me always feels like another bit of like, look at my superiority to these people. But it's always the news person commenting on it. And my thought is, but my dude, you are also a person with a camera standing in that spot
But this
doing
is
the
my
exact same
job to
thing.
do it. This
And
is
the
my
only
job to do
difference
it. Yeah.
between them and you is that they are documenting it without a capitalistic motive. And that is supposed to make you better than them, I guess. And that always just makes me feel gross about that commentary.
I want to go this way. I've mentioned this earlier, where Roland Emmerich will put his politics on his sleeve. As I said, in Godzilla, he made the mayor Roger Ebert, and he looks like Roger Ebert, and his assistant looks like Gene Siskel, and they do the whole thumbs up thing. In this movie, we have the president and the vice president, and they are so looking like Dick Cheney and George W. Bush. There is no subtlety here. We have Kenneth Welsh as the vice president and Perry King as the president. And yeah, it is very obvious that they're supposed to look like and kind of be Dick Cheney and George W. Bush.
Oh, and Roland said at the time, oh yeah, no, that's exactly, like, he's never denied any of it when they were like, is that supposed to be Siskel and Ebert? He was like, oh yeah, you betcha. So it's like exactly supposed to be Siskel and Ebert. And when people were like, is that supposed to be Bush and Cheney? He was like, oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it was supposed to be Bush and Cheney. And then people were like, why did you destroy New York? Like, you could have picked a different city. There's lots of cities in the Northeast even, or in the North. Like, why didn't you pick, Chicago? That's a frosty city in the north of, or why didn't you pick Detroit? Or why didn't you pick,
Minneapolis, yeah.
Minneapolis? Or why didn't you pick Seattle? Or why didn't you pick, yeah. Why didn't you pick just anywhere else that has like relatively tall buildings and landmarks and whatever that's north of that line? You could have even picked DC because DC is north of that line, it's like, and he was like, because this was not that long after 9/11, it's 2004.
Yeah, only a few years.
And he was like, well, I wanted to talk about people coming together after a big disaster and talk about unity and talk about how we need to, which I find kind of a cop-out because they don't really talk about that in this movie.
We have the moments of small groups of people coming together, but like there's that moment where we have a lot of people in the New York Public Library. The first chance they get when they see people walking, hey, they're going south, we should go with them, they bolt. Now, granted, they all die because of hypothermia, but it's not exactly the moment of unity he says it is.
But even if it's like, after a disaster and let's take care of people and stuff, they're not really shown taking care of each other or helping each other, or, like at best they all flee into a place together and just kind of look around and go like, well, what now? Which is not really the same thing,
Mm-hmm. I mean, to go backwards to what I was saying earlier, because we have that moment at the UN. I think it's supposed to be the UN, where Dennis Quaid is saying his thing. Hey, this is going to happen. It's going to be bigger, and it's going to keep on happening. And then we have our Dick Cheney stand in and said, yeah, we could do something about climate change, but who's going to pay for it? Where's the economic value in all of that? Which is an argument that's still happening to this day. Which is kind of my point about bringing all of that up in the first place.
And honestly, that's the one thing I kind of agree with in this film is when he says, hey, our climate's very fragile, and the Dick Cheney stand-in goes like, well, in fairness, our economy is very fragile too.
I mean, we just had a thing of 3 years ago of the same thing. Well, we could do something about this virus, or we could just open the economy back up again and force people back to work.
Yeah. It's the thing of, you're not wrong at the basis of what you're trying to say. I just take issue with how you're going about trying to get your message across. I agree with the desire for the urgency in the movie. You know, this is coming, and it's coming faster than we want to admit, because the scientists keep having to revise their models because it's speeding up faster than they originally predicted.
Yeah, it goes from years to weeks to days.
Yeah. And at first, he's standing there talking to the Dick Cheney clone in a climate conference, and he's saying, hey, we just had a massive ice shelf break off, and this could mean that in a few years, but our children and grandchildren are going to pay for this, and we need to do something about it starting now. And then he gets back, and there's already, by the time he walks outside, there's weird weather occurring, and by the time he gets back to the US, there's more weird weather, and they're thinking like, oh no, it's going to be within months. And then she's like, no, not months, with weeks. And then they get more data from Ian Holm, and he's like, no, maybe days. And then they're getting data from the astronauts, and it's like, oh no, like you got like a couple of hours, it's like, so it's one of those things of, that also is not incorrect, because if you listen to climate scientists, they do keep saying, well, we had been optimistic in the fact that when we warned people, governments and corporations and all, that what you are doing and allowing to happen is leading to some horrible effects, that they would listen and maybe stop or slow down or reverse course. And that didn't happen. And so now it's speeding up. And that was the thing we didn't really plan for. And so now we've had to revise that and revise it again and revise it again,
It's like, the average Joe, you want to do something and then you say, well, I'm not going to do it. That's a problem for future me. Well, future you is coming up faster than you think it is, and here we are.
Yeah, so I do like the idea of it's coming faster than you think. The problem is that in some ways I wish it were a bit more of a metaphor. When you do a movie like recently we had Don't Look Up, and they used the asteroid in that as a metaphor for things like climate change. And so, yes, in there, it's using a kind of the Armageddon scenario, where it's slightly unrealistic on the science, but it's because it's a metaphorical scenario. It's a satire. So I wish almost in a way that a movie like this was using some kind of metaphorical scenario, but I think presenting it as like this is it's sort of a thing that could happen, is a bit problematic, because then you have people going like, well, if it's not the day after tomorrow scenario, we've got time.
And that was what I was saying earlier. There's people, because of the way this film was presenting it, it kind of made people kind of see it as even more of a joke than they already had seen it.
Yeah, and the thing is that sadly, the human mind does have an ability to put things off. It's a problem for future me, we do a lot of procrastinating sometimes. And so the idea, we talked about it last time in Armageddon, that, we do the Armageddon version of that, what if an asteroid is coming is, okay, well, you put a nuclear bomb and you break it apart, and at the last second it splits and it goes around the Earth, and it's like a big fiery show. But the real world version of that we just tested is, you send a rocket out there, you crash it into a thing, it nudges it a little bit, and, in 6 or 7 months you've deflected it enough that it never comes near us at all and it floats harmlessly past.
But that doesn't make a good movie.
But that's not that's a bunch of people sitting in a room going, and we've made contact. Yay! All right, good job, everybody. We're safe. Like, it's not really that compelling. And that's the thing. People talk about, I watched a video recently where somebody had gone back over the Y2K computer glitch. If you're old enough to remember that, where everybody was saying, like, oh, when the Y2K computer glitch happens, when
planes falling out of the sky,
everything's going to catch on fire, and people are going to run around screaming, and everything's going to just go absolutely haywire. And then the thing is that when that rollover happened, when midnight hit, nothing happened. I mean, there were some minor glitches and some minor systems, but none of the catastrophic events that were predicted occurred. And that was because what most people, I think, to this day still don't realize is that around the world, and especially in the US, we mobilized a large force of computer code people to fix those systems. And so they worked for years to fix those systems and roll out new software that could handle the glitch. So when the, 1999, 2000, Y2K rollover happened, the software patch had already been rolled out, and the new computers could handle it. And we did that slowly and steadily over the course of several years, to the point now that everybody says, hey, remember the Y2K hoax? When everybody thought that was a problem and it was going to cause massive system failure? They think it was a hoax now. But it wasn't. It was a massive problem. And if it had been left to go, then yeah, probably a lot of that stuff that was predicted to happen might have happened. Not in that catastrophic, like, oh, it's a grand disaster movie. But yeah, a lot of systems would have kind of crashed and burned.
I mean, people were kind of using it in relation to COVID. Is like, yeah, the reason Y2K didn't happen was because we had the smart people. We listened to the smart people, and the smart people made sure it didn't happen. And then, well, why didn't they do this for the pandemic? Well, they had a plan, and then they threw out the plan saying we would never need it. Uh-oh, pandemic.
We didn't listen to the scientists. And what happens when you don't listen to the scientists? It's like, well, all right, if we'd been kind of planning slowly and steadily over the years, then that it would have been, I'm not saying a complete non-issue, but
it wouldn't have been as bad as it ended up being in real life.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that human brains are geared to really want to be like, oh, well, what happens when there's a tiger attack and you need to run from the tiger? And not just like, Probably the thing I'm going to have to deal with is the mundane, everyday, I got to get up, I got to do laundry, I got to, do my dishes, I got to, our brains aren't really wired for that kind of just everyday plodding along and whatever, because evolutionarily, we kind of had to deal with what happens if the saber-toothed tiger jumps out and attacks.
I mean, everyone had their, people were expecting the zombie apocalypse, and when it was just not that, they didn't understand the severity of it, or thought it was a hoax.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you plan enough and I plan a lot of logistic events. I do. I plan a lot of events where, you have to get people together and you have to make sure everything runs on time and people are where they need to be. And so I deal with a lot of contingency plans. And so I'm constantly saying in meetings, what do we do if this doesn't happen, or if this falls apart, or if that, and I bring up these scenarios, what if we need this thing, or that doesn't show up, or whatever. And I'm constantly hearing after events, that, oh, weren't you such a worrywart? See, things went just fine. And I always have to stop myself from going, yeah, but they went just fine because I had that plan in place. Like, you think that everything just happened, but you don't see that it happened, You think the train just got from A to B because that's just what trains do, but the train got from A to B because I laid out the track and I made sure there was a conductor and I made sure that we had enough fuel to get us from A to B. But in your brain, well, trains, of course they go from A to B. That's just how a train works, It's like, because you've never seen how that functions, And so I think that that's how people constantly look at big issues like climate change or things like pandemics or how government bureaucracies work. Pick any large system. If you only ever see it running smoothly, when things start to fall apart, you think about the thing of in the Towering Inferno, you think about well, what happens in the most catastrophic thing? And we pointed out in the Towering Inferno, it would have never become a catastrophe if you'd have left all the small systems in place. The architect had built multiple redundant systems in the Towering Inferno. In Poseidon Adventure, the Poseidon probably would have been able to deal with that tsunami
if they were allowed to put on enough ballast.
Yeah, if they had enough ballast in there, and if they had been running at slower speed, they possibly would have been able to survive that tsunami. Or they would have been at a different spot in the ocean, and they wouldn't have been there when the tsunami hit. Either or.
So what you're saying is that the real enemy is bureaucracy.
No, I'm
Capitalism.
saying that. Yeah, that too. But I'm saying that sometimes, just having a plan and having redundant systems is there. But the human brain always wants, and this is the thing about disaster films. The reason disaster films are so compelling, and they're compelling to me, which is why I wanted to do this disaster film month, right? It's the reason why zombie films are so compelling. Spoiler alert. But it's the reason why, all of these things grip our brain, is because we want to know what would we do in the catastrophic scenario. But I am also the type of person that loves to plan. And the reason I love a catastrophic scenario movie, like disaster movies, is I love looking at these things and going, okay, how do I never end up there? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, where are all the steps where they could have prevented ever being anywhere near this scenario? Not what would I do if I were in that scenario, but how do I make sure I'm never in that scenario in the first place? How do I make sure I'm never in the Towering Inferno? How do I make sure I'm never in the Poseidon Adventure? How do I make sure, we don't end up in The Day After Tomorrow or whatever?
And that's the thing, is that's how you would think, and that's smart. But most people thinking like that is boring. They want to think, what if I was in an action movie and I get to be John McClane?
I also think that too, because there are some things you just can't plan on.
Yeah.
But I just love planning. I'm that kind of nerd. I'm that kind of like, what would I do in any given scenario? So I think that that's what compels me about these films. Because as we've proven over and over again, as we talk about these films, they are not good. I don't think that there's a disaster film ever made that's probably a good movie. I'm not sure I can really think of one in the genre that's probably like both a good disaster movie and a good like movie. I don't know. Poseidon Adventure kind of comes close in the fact that you like the characters. And if you want to call some, like, I really do like the like some of the original Godzilla, for instance, but there's not a lot of ones that are in the disaster film genre that I would just be like, this holds up just as a film. Maybe, I mean, do you want to call something like Jurassic Park a disaster movie? I don't know. I would call that more like a creature feature. I don't know. If Godzilla counts, maybe Jurassic Park does too. And that I would probably say, like, okay, you can maybe call that a disaster movie. But I don't really think of that. I think of disaster movies as more fighting the elements or fighting the environment rather than fighting a creature, but who knows? I mean, we haven't gone through the film,
yeah,
so
yeah. Have you noticed that we haven't even gone to the plot, the actual plot of this movie, because it's not a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean,
the main plot is Jake Gyllenhaal is in love with Emmy Rossum, and he's on the debate team because he has a crush on her, and they're stuck in New York. That's the plot. That is.
And they're stuck in New York, and his dad has to go get him because he's stuck in New York.
So
yeah,
Home Alone. Oh my! This movie's Home Alone.
Are the wolves the intruders, or is the ice the intruder?
Yes.
Both.
Yes, both.
The funniest scene, and the ones that scientists like to make fun of the most, is the running away from the ice scene. Because there is the point where they make Jake Gyllenhaal run away from ice, because you have that
the
quick
flash freezing.
Yeah. Where
close the door before the freezing gets us.
Yes, because cold can't come through doors. That's how doors work. Of course, the funniest thing to me is that they're in the library, and they are in a room with just the most gigantic windows. At least 2 walls of this room are just covered with like 2-story windows.
But that's the room with the fireplace.
Well, no, but it is the room with the fireplace, and I'm not saying they're wrong to be in that room necessarily, but they don't try to cover the glass or reinforce the windows in any way. Closing that one door, that's what keeps the cold out. And I'm like, you know how hard it is to insulate a window. Come on. This is not, come on. But yeah, I don't know. And I'm also like, okay, I get that you've got the fire burning and everything, but that's a chimney. And I know that they're like, quick, don't let the fire go out. Don't let the fire go out and everything. But like, come on.
And then we get the subplot of the jealousy, because there's like another debate team member that Emmy Rossum looks to have a crush on, and
well, he's the rich boy.
Yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal has the opportunity to leave, but he does it because he doesn't want to leave Emmy Rossum alone with the rich boy, because he's in love with her. You see.
Yeah, and the thing that I always find kind of the dumbest thing is they're trying to get out of town. They know that it's flooded and that the trains aren't moving. And they're like, well, we could stay here in this nice, lush apartment way, way, way above the water with all the food and like presumably fireplace and, you know, heat and everything. Granted, they don't know what's coming at that point, but it's like,
no, we have to get home.
It's like, no, we have to get home. They're like, well, my driver is gonna be, and I'm like, it's so flooded, trains can't move. What do you think your driver is gonna do in your posh little car? Like,
again, because Jake Gyllenhaal doesn't want to leave his love interest, girl he has a crush on, with the rich boy. That's the entire plot of this. He doesn't want to leave her alone with the rich boy.
Stay there with the rich boy. Like, convince the rich boy to stay there.
But that's the thing, is that he's not the bad guy. Like you would think in this kind of scenario that the rich boy would be the asshole, but he's not.
Yeah, he's just a rich boy. Like,
he's talking about, I have to find my brother who's in Philadelphia. My dad is across the country with my stepmom. I never see him.
No, they're in Europe, so they're dead. He says that they're in Europe on a skiing trip.
Mm-hmm.
He says that his dad and his stepmom are in Europe right now on a skiing trip. So they are dead. All of Europe is dead. I don't know if you get that in the movie, but all of Europe is dead. It's pretty clear in the movie that all of Europe has frozen to death. It's not like specifically stated, but except for the ones that were close enough, like I'm pretty sure that this is how the geography is going to work out, you know, with the geography of Europe here, because of the way that line works out. The way the contiguous United States works is like, if you can keep on walking and stuff, you can get below that line. But when he draws that line, if you kind of just keep following that line and where the ice ends up at the end of the movie, Europe is dead. Like, all of Europe is super duper dead, except for like maybe a little bit at like the bottom of Italy, and anybody who could maybe very quickly get across into northern Africa before everything froze.
I mean, we get that scene with Ian Holm and his team having that one last drink together before they freeze to death.
Yeah, before the generator cuts out and they freeze to death, they're just like, well, you know, here's to the Queen or whatever, that they die.
Here's to Manchester United.
Yeah, it's like, sure, whatever. And they're all like, the weird thing is that they're all like, you know, I wish I could see my kids grow up. And they're like, yeah, but the thing is they will grow up. And I was like, did they get evacuated and I missed it? They must have at some point in the movie that said that like their kids got out or something, or grandkids, because other than that, like they're super dead too, because they know by that point how bad the storm is and what's going to happen. So there must have been like a bit that I missed in the rewatch that said that their kids were going to be okay. The thing is, though, is that it's kind of interesting because the geopolitics of this world after this movie, because they're dealing mostly with America, because that's tends to be what these movies do. They're focusing in this movie specifically just on what happens with America. But when you see that ice line form and how quickly it formed, and they're like, well, move everybody south and stuff, depending on how quickly people were able to evacuate and how easily they were able to get into the countries south of that line, or how many of them survived and would be able to migrate south after that snap freeze. Because we see at the end of the movie, when Jake Gyllenhaal's little group is rescued, that there are people in New York other than Jake Gyllenhaal's party that were able to survive in some of the skyscrapers. Which is maybe why you should have stayed in the posh apartment of the rich dude. Just saying, maybe, Jake.
And again, the fact that the posh rich dude turned out to actually be a decent dude just made the whole thing pointless. Like, he's not there to steal your girl. He's actually a nice dude who just wants to see if his brother's still alive.
Yeah, your girl almost died there, Jake, because you made them all go out of the, you should have just stayed in the room there and been like, hey, what, can we just stay here for a little bit and use your phone? You can have your doorman kick us out in a couple of hours if we don't, you could have done that. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a fascinating kind of geopolitical scenario afterwards, because it's wiped out all of Europe, pretty much all of Russia, most of China. It really is. It's most of the northern hemisphere is just gone.
All of the U.S., all of North America, north of Mexico is frozen.
Well, I mean, not all of it. It's kind of basically everything above roughly the Mason-Dixon line is hard frozen, and it kind of dips below that a little bit in that it's probably cold-ish, but not too cold to survive.
The scene of people, again, no subtlety. They straight up saying Americans are illegally going into Mexico.
Yeah. And they say that Mexico only starts letting them in when the U.S. forgives, quote unquote, all Latin American debt, which is really fascinating because that wouldn't just be Mexico's debt. That would be a lot of countries. So
the average American thinks it's all Mexico anyway, which is dumb.
Well, I mean, maybe, but it's kind of fascinating. And then also, though, most of America just got devastated. So I'm not really sure that that the U.S. really was going to be in a place. I mean, let's just face it. Canada's gone. I'm not sure if anybody made it out of Canada. Poor Canada.
The movie doesn't even touch upon that.
Yeah, nobody even mentions Canada at any point in this movie, I don't think.
We get the United States, the UK, and Mexico.
Yeah, a couple of other countries are vaguely mentioned. I mean, they mention India because they're in Delhi for the conference. And they mentioned Japan. And then, of course, we've got the in Scotland and everything, because we're dealing with Ian Holmes' group and all that kind of stuff. I feel really bad. Also, I'm not sure that the astronauts know what North America is, because when the storms start clearing up, they signal up to the space station, and they're like, "Hey, we've got ideas that the storms are clearing over North America. Can you confirm?" And they look out the window and they go, "Yeah, we can confirm that." While looking down at Italy, and I'm like, that's not what we asked you, or either that, or you're completely ignorant of geography, maybe. But
either way, you guys are stuck up there for a while.
yeah, because the two major countries that can get you down from there have just been, like, I don't remember what or three, because China had been sending some people up there, but China, Russia, and the US have all been absolutely devastated by this storm. And yeah, that's kind of mostly your way back, depending. So, I mean, Florida and Texas are not in the freeze zone, so, but still, the U.S. is not really working at full capacity at the moment, so you're going to be stuck there for a while. I hope you have enough supplies. I hope you're enjoying those clear skies and that view that you're going, ooh over at the end of the movie.
I've never seen the sky so clear and everything's frozen.
Yeah, like, I mean, that does tend to happen after a hard freeze, but also you are screwed because you are now stuck in the space station and nobody's coming to get you for a while. This is such an odd movie, politically, scientifically, in the lack of plot. I mean, I'm happy the dog survives.
Oh yeah, we haven't even gotten to the homeless man with the dog.
Yeah. I mean, I hate that they kind of do the, like, herder, he's a homeless man jokes, but also there is kind of a weird thing where his knowledge does occasionally prove useful.
Yeah, he even says he knows how to survive in the cold with little resources.
Yeah, he does tell them occasionally, like, how to insulate using, scraps of paper, and how, various places to find things,
food.
And, he's not wrong in what he says most of the time. And the fact that he's standing outside in the storm at the beginning because the guy won't let him in with the dog, and I kind of want to go, like, dude, it is a massive weather event. Just let the guy with the dog in. Stop being a jerk. And
in the face of a climate disaster, classism still exists.
Well, yeah, it will. The other thing that I kind of hate about the group in the library is that there's the one little thing about the thing where they have to go in the library and they're looking in the, like, we need to find the fireplace and all for warmth because we know, Jake Gyllenhaal kind of knows what's coming because he talks to his dad, and gets all the information about what's coming and what they need to do to survive. And so they go, the group that chooses to believe him when he says, hey, my dad's a climate scientist with the government and he told me what to expect and you shouldn't go out there. So the ones that listen to reason and stay with him go and find the fireplace and they clear it out and they prepare to hunker down and survive. And then Jake Gyllenhaal's like, all right, bring me books and we've got to, put them in here and start burning them. And the librarian's like, you can't burn books. That's not. And he's like, what did you think we were going to burn? We're in a library. That is the source of fuel. And she's like, no, but books are sacred. And he's like, this is survival, And there's this whole through line in the movie where, like, the little stuck up librarian woman keeps going, like, you can't burn books, and books are good for something other than burning. And I'm like, you are stuck in a room with a whole bunch of nerds who are only in New York because they are nerdy academic decathlon people.
I mean, there's even one scene where one of the nerd guys actually is trying to get things going. It's like, I have this, this, and this. There's no bigger nerd in this building than me. We're doing this.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, like, woman, you're in a library, and yes, under normal circumstances, nobody's wanting to burn books. But it's not like you're just in the room full of cretins who are like, hi, we came in here to burn books because we don't like what they said. It's like, no, just find books that are like, pulp paperbacks that probably exist in mass in every, and there's even the jokes about like, oh, tax law and whatever. And, we're not asking to burn the rare book collection that only exists in this one thing. Just, find the things that, like, even the library has tons of volumes of that are mass produced everywhere. No, nobody's really going to be burning that unless it's literally the last source of fuel in the library, dude. It's fine. The movie suddenly acts like these kids who are massive nerds who read all the time for fun, that sort of thing, are just suddenly going to be going through the library being like, yay, destroy books, just because we can. Like, no, this is an extreme situation. You would, here's all the random, romance novels or something. There's 700 billion of these, and they're printed, by the hundreds, and they exist everywhere. Like, it's fine. There's more. Every library has hundreds of copies of these. It's okay, Or just grab all the printer paper out of the printers and stuff, like, do all that before you even get to the books. It's like, there's always just spare paper in a library,
Yeah.
It's so bizarre, burn the copies of today's periodicals, yesterday's periodicals, they're going to be, all kinds of stuff before you get to the rare book collection at the New York Library. It's so bizarre that Roland wants to make this point about how dare we burn books that he doesn't even think of, like, what else is in a library other than the rare book collection.
This preachy point of the written word was mankind's greatest achievement, and
then they make the point of specifically Western civilization, as if no other civilization had recorded text. Like, are you kidding me? I see you, Roland. I see you.
I think the only other plot point we haven't even touched on is Stella Ward's plot point with young Peter, the cancer child. This is young boy.
Everyone else abandons the hospital, and Stella Ward has to stay and care for him because his parents haven't come for him. Presumably, they've, like, died in the storm or something.
There's this one line where, it was in the hubbub, everyone left. Like, wait, so you're telling me that this boy's parents just left the hospital without their son? That's what you're telling me, movie. That in the hubbub of everything happening, they just left.
Well, the thing is, we never see the kids' parents, and
never in the movie at all.
In the movie, and the thing is that, like, I'm not saying that there would never be a time of day when a child patient would be left alone by their parents in a ward like that, but, like, usually with kids like that, there's generally a family member hanging around at some point. I'm not saying 24/7, Because, yeah, a lot of families that they have to work, and, the parents would go away to work, and, all that kind of stuff. So I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that maybe the parents were like, hey, we're going to go home and get some stuff, or, they were away at work or whatever. And we only ever see the kid at times when the parents have had to be at work or had to be at, something else, and nobody from the family was staying with the kid. But I guess that when they're like, oh, maybe when they said the parents never came for him, I've always given the movie the benefit of the doubt that, like, the parents were killed in the storm trying to get back.
That would make it better.
But there's always the possibility that maybe the parents were like, hey, we're never going to make it down to the evacuation zone if we have to drag our kid with us, and just skipped, which would make them awful. But the way the movie does it is that basically all of the staff of the hospital just left. When the evacuation was called, all of the people in the hospital just left, and the only two people left are Celia Ward and this kid, and one nurse who informed Celia Ward, like, his parents never came back, and I called for an ambulance, and the ambulance never showed up, and there's one cop left with a snowplow. He's here to take us. And she's like, but the kid is so sick, he can only be transported in an ambulance. You go, nurse. I'll stay with the kid, and we'll just wait and hope somebody comes for us. Because I am Celia Ward, and I am good and holy, and I will stay here and take care of this kid,
And that they end up okay, because right at the end of the movie, you see a guy, hey, we heard some people were left behind. We got an ambulance.
Yeah, eventually an ambulance comes for them before the storm does, but they are eventually rescued. But yeah, that's like, Celia Ward and this poor kid, they're eventually taken down to Texas or wherever. I was not quite clear on where they started the movie.
I thought it would be Los Angeles.
No, I don't remember if it was, because, like, his dad kept saying, like, I'll come get you. I've walked farther than that. And the mother was hugging him by and go get our son. So maybe DC? Possibly.
I mean, he does work for the government, so it's possible.
Yeah, and also I'm thinking maybe DC. But I couldn't. I'm thinking that it was somewhere that was, for them to be able to drive an ambulance out there. I think it was somewhere that was just low enough on the line that it was in danger, but not low enough on the line that it got the quick freeze. We get all kinds of horrible things of them walking through, Jack walking through the storm to go get his son, and his friend that sacrifices himself because he falls through a mall skylight. Because they don't realize that the mall is underneath them because of all the snow has piled up, and they're walking over buildings now. His friend sacrifices himself so that the other two guys won't fall through the glass. And then, of course, we have the absolute craziness of that giant Russian cargo ship that floats through the streets of Manhattan and ends up right outside the library. And all I can think of is there is no way that it has navigated by itself the narrow streets of Manhattan.
Deus Ex Botica.
Yeah, without just crashing through a building or getting wedged somewhere or capsizing in that wave.
Yeah.
Like, how is this boat still right side up after that wave? Because that tidal wave overturned everything, and you're telling me that cargo ship is still right side up. I don't know.
But it conveniently has supplies and medicine that they need.
Also, how does Dennis Quaid not just wander in and be like, by the way, we saw some flash frozen wolves right outside the door. Is anybody going to explain that? Because the wolves have chased them back. Like, we hear the wolves barking as they're closing the door. And that was during the flash freeze. So you know that those wolves were chasing them and then got flash freeze. So there is flash frozen wolf like somewhere in a statue pose. Like, and I'm kind of mad at the movie for not ever showing us that. Also, Roland Emmerich doesn't know how big wolves are.
The CG on the wolves are not that good.
Well, also, like, they're really tiny. They're dog-sized, and I don't know if you've ever seen video of a wolf next to an actual human, but wolves are huge. So, like, however big you think a wolf is, they're bigger than that. They are not dog-sized. They are very, very large. They are not the size of your puppy or your German Shepherd. They are massive. And so if you've ever only seen them, from a distance or like in a photograph or whatever, go look up video of like people who work with wolves in, like a rehab place. They are massive. So that's my thing, is whenever they do like wolves in films, a lot of people do not understand the relative size between a human and a wolf. So this movie definitely does not, because it looks like he's being attacked by like, a German Shepherd sized dog and whatever. I'm like, that is not what a wolf looks like.
Yeah, so I don't think we can really talk any more about this movie than we've already have. So let's ask the question, Kiki, does The Day After Tomorrow have the magic?
Oh, it's a mess. No. The reason I wanted to talk about this, I mean, hold on. Let me ask you the same question though. Do you think it has magic?
I think if it was a better written film, maybe, but it like a lot of these disaster movies, it makes a nice spectacle. It's popcorn fodder. It's something to entertain yourself for a few hours, but it's just going to go on my rewatch pile. No, so I'll say no.
The reason I wanted to talk about this one in finishing the month is that when we talked about the disaster genre kind of hit its big stride, and then the Towering Inferno in the 70s and all, but we never really talked about kind of how it dipped in the 70s and went into its kind of, sleeping phase throughout the 80s and stuff. And then it had its resurgence in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then the reason why I kind of wanted to talk about this movie was kind of one of the death knells, I thought, of that resurgence. Because when this movie came out, I remember everyone just ripping this apart. People, even though Armageddon wasn't a good movie, people liked it. Like, it's a good popcorn movie. This one has good special effects, but it's not a fun movie. It's not a slog. Like, you don't sit there and go like, oh my god, I'd rather be watching anything else. But it's not fun. It's not a horrible film. It's just kind of cinematic wallpaper. This is one of the few times where we're talking about a movie and we ended up talking about basically everything but the movie.
Because there's not a lot of substance in here. The storyline is very simplistic, which I understand that's not the point. The point is the spectacle. The point is the special effects. It's considering this is early 2000s, the CG, the star power in Dennis Quaid. That's what you're selling this movie on. You're not selling this movie on the story. And I think at that point, people were kind of tired of it. They kind of wanted a little bit more meat on the bones, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's one of those things of, I mean, Roland definitely isn't done with the genre as far as disaster as a genre, because he keeps doing disaster as a genre, even though people aren't really into it yet, into it still, because like you said, he did 2012 after this. He did another Independence Day movie to try to get that back. And just this year, as we're recording this, he did a movie called Moonfall, which, I mean, basically nobody saw, which is the conspiracy theory of, like, what if the moon was evil and attacked us?
Yeah, I played that game. It's called Legend of Zelda.
It's kind of the anti-Pixar thing. It's like, what if blank had feelings? And Roland's like, what if blank was a conspiracy that is trying to kill us all? But I don't think people are really into it anymore. It's not where we're at. 2012 did kind of okay, because I think we were still in the kind of like, a spectacle of things, but it's like Independence Day came out in 2016, and I don't know if you remember 2016, but that was a crap year. It was a year that was so crap, we were like, well, this is going to go down as the crappiest year, and then it just kind of kept getting worse from there.
Yeah.
And I think by now we're all like, wow, we've got actual problems to worry about. We don't really need to see disaster films,
We're living in one.
Yeah, we're living in the disaster film. And even if, we're talking, this is a movie about climate change and dealing with climate change and stuff. And what if the earth froze, or at least part of the earth froze? And I'm not saying that we're over that idea, because we got a much better version of that idea later with the movie Snowpiercer, that then became the TV show Snowpiercer, and both of those are excellent. They're kind of two different versions of the same idea, and based on a graphic novel. And I love both of those. And while you can say, like, well, the science is slightly suspect in that, it's a lot better than what Roland is doing. But it deals more with the, like, okay, the worst happened, and what do we do to rebuild after that? Which is a bit of a different story, I don't think Roland understands the how do you rebuild after that. I think he's just into the spectacle of run away from the danger.
All right, so yeah. So let's move on to next week. Listeners might remember last month when we had our good friend Jeff Whitmire on, and his request is actually going to be next week's episode, as he requested 28 days later. So technically, we have one more disaster as we're dealing with the zombie apocalypse.
Sort of.
Well,
we'll get to the fine line distinction of that next week.
So come back for that, and we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
Bye. If you want to help the fight for human rights in the U.S., the American Civil Liberties Union works to protect constitutional rights for all Americans. Their website is aclu.org. If you need reproductive services in the U.S. or wish to donate to those who do, go to abortionfunds.org for more info. The battle isn't over until the last person surrenders. The fight continues. Don't let the magic stop here.
Join our conversation online on Facebook at Rewatching the Magic.
Twitter at Rewatch the Magic.
And of course, new episodes every week at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com.
Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.